King Tode van Tarn, the first king of Tarn, was a competent and resourceful ruler, a man who forged all the right alliances, and the one to hold out against all odds, defending the kingdom from the seemingly almighty Imperium's attacks during the first Eastport invasion. But was King Tode really all those things? Or is nostalgia clouding people's minds now that his son Weert rules, who's deemed by many to be dangerously incapable? To find out, we first have to take a closer look at Tode's early years. The future king was born in the year 634 after the Great Drowning, as the second of 4 siblings. His mother was Stintje van Tarn, a strict and sickly woman who had lost 2 of her siblings very young and so had become overly protective of her own children. Tode's father, Henno Dirkenbold, was barely a father at all, as he would lock himself in his office the few times he'd return from various business trips, more concerned with work than his family. Growing up, Tode had no friends but his siblings. None of them were allowed to leave the family estate, and so their contact with the outside world was limited to the people coming to visit them. One of those visitors, Tode's uncle Weert, would grow especially close to the curious boy. He was a sailor, working on one of the family's merchant vessels, and his tales fascinated Tode more than anything else in his life. No doubt Weert exaggerated his adventures, but young Tode didn't know. He instead absorbed the stories of pirates on the high seas and sea monsters larger than any ship, and wished for nothing more than to lead his own life of adventure one day. Another important person in Tode's life was his grandfather, Wessel, the family head at the time. Wessel was a jolly old man who would often gift his grandchildren toys from faraway ports. One such toy was a finely carved wooden sword, a gift that would further fuel Tode's imagination and eventually led to fighting lessons with his uncle Weert. At least until his mother caught wind of this, confiscated the sword, and forbade her brother from spending time with her son. Tode would still meet up with his uncle, though only in secret, and over the years their meetings grew sparse, as Weert would spend more and more time at sea. Now a teenager, Tode grew restless, and the relationship to his mother strained. He'd often get into fights with her, even over the most mundane things, and he hated how his 2 younger siblings didn't seem to have any problems with being locked away. The only one who understood his plight was his older sibling, Arke, but even they grew distant from him. Until one day, when Tode was 19, Arke disappeared, leaving nothing but a note behind. In it they detailed their desire for a purpose in life, and rejected their family name, instead choosing the life of a priest. Priests couldn't inherit, and so from one day to the next, Tode was next in line after his mother to inherit the family business. A responsibility he'd never wanted nor expected, one that would shackle him for life. Furious, Tode hatched a plan, and only a few months later, now aged 20, he packed his things, stole some money from his mother's secret treasury, and left, without a trace. Tode stayed gone for 4 years, from 654 to 658. The exact details have remained unclear to this day, but when he finally returned, he was a changed man. Before his disappearance, he'd been an angry boy in conflict with his family. Now, 4 long years later, he was a confident young man looking to smooth things over once and for all. And importantly, he didn't return alone. He'd brought a young woman with him, someone called Geelke, whom he intended to marry. After he'd paid his mother back more than double what he had stolen from her, he offered his help in the household. And although his help was sorely needed, both his mother and his sister Ele showed him the cold shoulder at first. His brother Gert, however, now 15 years old, was excited about Tode's return, and through him Tode slowly warmed up to his sister first, and then eventually his mother as well. Ele, it turned out, had already taken over much of the financial management for her mother, during Tode's absence. She'd always been a bookish and studious girl, so it was only natural for her to excel at her new tasks. Gert had taken much more after his two oldest siblings, an energetic teenage boy with an adventurous side, who liked to spend time with friends, which he had curiously been allowed to do. It seemed their mother had grown at least a little more lax over time, though Gert still had to adhere to a strict curfew, which kept him home from the early evenings until noon every day. It took Tode years to repair the relationship to his mother, and even then it never quite moved beyond mutual respect. His diligence as a helping hand around the house and the family business did not go unappreciated, however, especially when his mother's health began rapidly declining only a few years after his return. With her unable to leave her bed eventually, the Van Tarn trading company fell into the three siblings' hands, who did their best to help both their mother and each other, an experience that saw them growing closer than ever. In 665, Stintje van Tarn died, whisked away by her illness. Now almost 31 years old, Tode officially inherited the family business, though he agreed with his siblings to share both work and profits between the three of them. With the three siblings at the helm, business boomed over the next few years. And not only that, after some time of fruitless trying, Tode and his now wife Geelke finally had their first child in 668, a son they named Wessel, after Tode's grandfather. 3 years later, their second son Weert followed. Tode stayed in the city of Wacom over the next years, always close to his family, making sure to spend as much time with his two boys as he could spare. His sister Ele took great care of the family's finances and made sure of the quality of the wares, while his brother Gert handled relations with other port cities. Tode often arranged meetings with officials of the Arcanum itself, which he had begun to build a rapport with since his return. One such official he met many times was a young mage called Adelborn, the personal apprentice of First Mage Gesina. The two spent many days together, both at the Arcanum's headquarters and in Tode's home, where his sons played while the adults talked. While it is unclear where Tode's sudden interest in magic came from exactly, his son Weert claims his father had known about the coming invasion more than a decade before it happened, and had wisely sought out the Arcanum as a powerful ally. Where he got this foresight from, even his family doesn't know. When Tode's sons were 9 and 6 respectively in 677, he began traveling again, with his wife and children by his side. He believed the Fastendoma could be strengthened by working closer together, and his family's wealth could be used to facilitate those relationships. And so he first went to Noorderhorn to meet with Vastag Ermelts, then to Henreest and its Fasten Ele van Tarn. He offered both of them paved and fortified overland roads to strengthen their trade relations, which had dwindled over the centuries as old trade routes had slowly fallen into disrepair, and all three Fastendoma had focused more on seaward trade instead. Negotiations with Noorderhorn moved quickly, and so within a year of their first meeting, the Fasten started construction on the road connecting their realms, with large sums of money from the Van Tarn family supporting the project. Ele van Tarn of the Fastendom of Henreest was more apprehensive, delaying a deal for worries of non-profitability. In 679, Tode's and Geelke's third son Sievert was born. With the new baby just having arrived, Geelke took a break from traveling, while Tode took his two other sons on a last trip to Henreest, after which he meant to return home to his wife to stay with her for a while. Unfortunately, the next years would be considerably more hectic than anticipated, with a war on the horizon that would forever change both the fate of the Prieske Fastendoma and the Van Tarn family at their center. The first Eastbrand invasion is a topic for a later video, as is Tode's reign up until his eventual death. But this video isn't over yet. Far from it, actually. let's talk a little more about some of the characters I only mentioned in passing throughout this story. The narrative today was very focused on Tode as a main character, but I think to get the full picture, we're going to have to go a little deeper into the Van Tarn family tree. First, all the way at the top here, Wessel van Tarn, Tode's grandfather and previous head of the Van Tarn family. Tode knew him as a jolly old man with a constant smile on his face and many life lessons to pass down to his grandchildren. He was responsible for a lot of the good connections the Van Tarn family had across different port cities as well as within the city of Arke itself. He was the kind of guy who could instantly make friends with people, which as it turns out was perfect for the kind of job he had. The Van Tarn family grew very wealthy under his guidance. Wessel had multiple children, as you can see, but only 2 of those played a prominent role in Tode's life, so let's focus on them. Stintje was Tode's mother. She had an older sister and a younger brother, both die at a very young age, and she herself always struggled with illness, which then played a big role in her becoming overly protective of her own children later in life. From the perspective of Tode, she doesn't come across as a good person almost ever, because obviously her relationship with him was very strained, but she did love her children, all of them, in her own, sometimes unhealthy ways. And she actually had a very good relationship with her daughter Ele, which we just don't see that much of from Tode's perspective. I feel bad for her, to be honest. Her paranoia ruined her own life and many of her relationships. I feel bad for a lot of people in this family, actually. When you think about it too closely, you quickly realize I've created kind of a huge bummer of a family tree, which will become ever more apparent over the years. Speaking of bummers, Tode's uncle and best friend throughout his childhood, Weert. I didn't really know how to integrate this into the story without going on a tangent and derailing everything, but Tode didn't just return on a whim after his 4 years of absence. Wherever he was at the time, he heard about his grandfather's passing, and the rumor was that Weert's disappearance at sea months earlier had driven Wessel to take his own life. While that is probably not true, there could still be a connection. Maybe he lost his will to live, and that contributed to his death. Nobody knows. And by the way, when I say Weert disappeared at sea, I actually mean the entire ship he was traveling on vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. Upon hearing this, Tode had no other choice but to return home. He'd been thinking about going back for a while, actually. But this was the final straw. He couldn't leave his family to cope with these back-to-back tragedies alone. Next up, Henno Dirkenbold, Tode's father. Not that much of a tragic figure, just an absent father. And absolutely the reason Tode took his sons with him on all his travels as soon as they were old enough. Henno was a workaholic and a member of another fairly wealthy family. This family, however, was from modern-day Friesland, so he spent a lot of time traveling between locations and very little time with his family. Geelke, Tode's wife and future queen. She is the one character I feel most guilty for excluding from the narrative so much. She obviously plays an important role in Tode's life, but she is also directly tied to the mystery of his 4-year absence. So I can't say too much about her without spoiling things I want to get into at a later date. I can say this though, she enjoys horseback riding, and she will definitely play a more important role in the years to come. Let's move on to Tode's siblings. Arke was Tode's older sibling, who very much like him was fed up with their home life and left. Arke was what's called a boetvesk, which historically in the Frieske language meant anyone who didn't conform to traditional gender roles. But as gender roles have become less rigid over time, the definition has shifted a bit. In real-life modern terms, we would probably describe the boetvesk as trans and/or non-binary, but it's a little less clearly defined in the Wavebreaker universe and includes some forms of cross-dressing as well. There are no further distinctions made either. If you're a boetvesk, you're a boetvesk, and that's it. In Prieske society, Budvesks are often seen as closer to the gods than other people, since deities are forces of nature with no concept of gender. Traditionally, this meant that almost all Budvesks were forced into priesthood, because they were considered too different to work normal jobs, basically. This isn't as widely spread anymore, but to finally come back to Tode's sibling Arke, many Budvesks still like to become priests, because it gives them a way to escape unaccepting and/or difficult families and basically start a new life somewhere else without the old family name attached. So that's what Arke did. They left home and became a priest somewhere far away from the later capital of the kingdom, where their family remained. Unfortunately, this move also means that Arke has left Tode's story completely and will not return. They kind of got the good ending instead of involving themselves in all this mess that's about to happen. I might make a video about Arke in the future, because even though their story is not relevant to the big picture politics going on around them, I still think they're an interesting character. Also, there would be a neat way to go deeper into Prieske religion, which I haven't done at all yet. Tode's sister Ele was the only one of the 4 siblings who had always had a good relationship with her mother. She didn't mind the strict curfews imposed on her, because she didn't feel comfortable around most people anyway, and preferred instead to stay home, where she could spend most of her time reading. She helped both her grandfather and later her mother as much as she could, always eager to learn. This developed into a strong sense of duty, especially after both Arke and Tode had left their family behind, making Ele the apparent heir to the family business. She grew confident in her abilities over the years, though the prospect of one day having to deal with all kinds of people on a daily basis still did not excite her. She'd much rather lock herself inside and let her brother Gert deal with others in her stead. Now Gert was a rowdy child, who had the good fortune of also being the youngest, and as such the one with the laxest of rules put upon him. He actually had the freedom to go out, even though he still had to be home early every evening, where Arke and Tode had been forced to stay at home, which made Gert the sibling with the most friends in town. And the only one of his siblings to be caught shoplifting, which could have cost him a finger had he not instead offered up a sizable sum of money. Tode's children at this point in time were still young, but seeing as one of his 3 sons would grow up to be king, I should probably still talk about them just a little bit here. Wessel was, by all means, the perfect son. He was active and always eager to learn, while being polite in the presence of adults and a loving older brother. Weert, in contrast, was small for his age and physically weak. He strove to be as much like his brother and best friend Wessel as he could, but often ended up in his shadow instead, leaving him ever more prone to take risks to prove himself. I'm sure this will have no impact on his later life or anything. Lastly, Sievert was a baby at this point, so there isn't much to say about him, other than that he was probably super cute, while also keeping his mother from getting any sleep at all. Hey, thanks for watching, and first of all, if you've made it this far, congratulations! It's been a long journey, the longest video I've ever made, and oh my god, what a pain in the ass to make it was. I don't know what to say, so I'm not going to say anything. I also don't want to be too negative, but at this point, I don't know if this is the best or possibly the worst video I've ever made. I've looked at the script so much, I've read parts of it out loud so much. I'll leave it up to you to judge whatever this is, and I'll see you in the next video that will not take 5 months to make. Until then, bye bye.